Hello and welcome to the SilviCultural Platform. In this tutorial, we'll take you through the process of mapping your land and establishing the foundation of your forest management using SilviCultural's collection of software and tools. By the time we're done, you'll have a map of your property with stands delineated, an estimate of standing inventory for those stands, and a sustainable harvest plan with an estimate of yields. Forest management isn't easy. It's a long-term commitment full of nuance, but SilviCultural makes it easy for everyone, regardless of experience. There is a catch, however. You have to put in the work. Some of our work will be out in the field, and some will be in front of a computer, but both fronts are critical to understanding your land and establishing a robust framework for management. If you do the work faithfully, you'll easily be in the 90th percentile of forest landowners nationally in terms of care and attention to your forest, and in the long term, you will be rewarded for that. Now, if you have a small property, you may be able to do this all in an afternoon. For a larger property, it might take a while. Not only will each task take longer in the latter case, but there are more possibilities and more details to consider, especially in terms of objectives. But in those cases, the potential rewards are only larger. So regardless of your situation, stick with it and see the process through, and your trees will thank you. The good news is that equipment requirements are minimal. All you need is a desktop or laptop computer, a smartphone or tablet, a compass, and one of these, an angle gauge. Out of all the tools, the angle gauge is the one you are most likely to be missing, but you should definitely grab one. They can be purchased for cheap and it provides you with critical data about what we call a basal area, which we'll discuss later. It's probably the most important forest measurement tool there is, so I'd highly recommend you grab one. So without further ado, let's get started. The heart of any forest management system is a map. Geographic information systems, as they're called, allow us to model our land for remote analysis, data storage, and planning. So the first task will be to make a map of our land. We'll start by opening up the mapping application on SilviCultural. What we want to create first is a GPS base layer on which we'll collect data in the field. Navigate to your property and zoom to an adequate resolution in the map view. When it's suited to your needs, go up to the Export button in the top left corner and export a geotiff. A geotiff is an image with geographic coordinate information in its metadata, so it's referenced to a specific point on Earth and thus can be used with GPS systems without any internet or data. These TIFFs are compatible with numerous systems and applications, but what I'm going to recommend in this video is a mobile app called Avenza, both because it is free and highly functional. So go ahead and find that in your App Store and download it onto your device. Once that's downloaded, transfer your exported TIFF onto the device and navigate to the My Maps interface on Avenza. Down in the corner, there's an addition sign. Hit it and then hit Download or Import Map. Hit Cloud Storage or Device, or Dropbox if that's what you chose to transfer the file, and then open your map. Once the map loads, you will see the imagery load as the base layer. If you're in the field, you should see your position show up as a blue dot. Before we begin mapping, let's check our settings. Check units of measurement and ensure they fit your preferences. Next, hit GPS settings. Look at the time threshold. This determines the time interval between GPS points when tracking. I prefer 30-second intervals, but if you move quickly through the woods, you may prefer 2 seconds. Just bear in mind that you can change these settings here. Now we're ready to start navigating and mapping. What we're going to start with, obviously, is mapping your property boundaries. If you know where they are, great, it's going to be easy for you. If you don't, you may have some research to do. Start by getting a copy of your deed at the Registry of Deeds to see the boundary description. This is the legal definition of your property and will likely reference boundary monuments and other reference points you can look for. The main goal and most important thing is to find the corners of your property. If you have your corners, you have the boundary. You can just take points at the corners and connect them. Bear in mind, we aren't trying to establish a property line or survey the property, we're just making a map. If you only have a few corners or boundaries but are missing others, you may have to default to your best guess, which you can support with information from tax maps and signs of historical exclusive use, such as harvest boundaries or fences. Just understand that it's only your best guess, and you'll have to seek the assistance of a surveyor before conducting any forest management activities in the woods itself. Once you're ready, you can delineate your property by walking the boundary with your GPS tracks turned on. Hit the ruler and pencil icon in the bottom left and hit Record GPS Tracks. As you walk, your position will be recorded, creating a track. As you walk the boundary, stop at any boundary monuments, such as survey pins, to mark their location specifically. Once you finish walking your boundary, you can use the tracking and waypoint tools to map out any other features you may want to add to your map, including roads, trails, ecological habitats, and more. Although for our purposes in this tutorial, we only need the boundary. The GeoTIFF base map export is a key function of SilviCultural and allows you to export base maps of anywhere in the world. And it works without any cell phone service, so be sure to use it to your advantage. When you're finished out in the field, export your features as a KML using the layers icon in the bottom right corner. Hit the ellipses next to the layer and hit Export. Adjust the settings as desired and export your file. Send it to your desired destination. When we get back to the computer, we can upload our exported KML. Let it upload and hit Confirm. It will populate on your screen. From here, we have a couple of options. We can take these KMLs and convert them into an object type directly, or we can trace over them. To save time cleaning up often messy GPS lines, I usually prefer to trace. To digitize, hit the Add New Object tab. Here you can see different object types you can add to your map. At the top, you can see a Use Snapping tool enabled. This will automatically snap your cursor to the nearest vertex. It has its uses, but it'll be troublesome for tracing over the KML, so ensure it is disabled. Click on Property. Once selected, we can begin to add vertices. Click a single time to add a vertex and trace around the KMLs. To scroll while digitizing, hold down on the left mouse and move around. Once the polygon is completed, double-click to finish the shape. An interface will appear to allow you to name the object and enter a description. Name it what you want. You'll also see an option to add it to a group. Groups allow you to organize objects based on property or type. For now, I'm going to create a group for boundaries and place it there. Congratulations, you now have the boundary of your property delineated. Now we can move on to management. Forests are anything but homogeneous. They're complex communities and ecosystems comprised of different species, age classes, and dynamics. Thus, effective forest management has to identify these complexities and address them individually. To do that, foresters break forests into stands, which are distinct areas within a forest that are relatively uniform in terms of its characteristics, such as species composition, age, size, and site conditions. In this exercise, we'll identify these stands in your forest and delineate them on our map. You may decide to do this exercise out in the field, and you certainly can, but the data layers provided on the mapping application should provide you enough information to do it on the computer, especially if you're already familiar with your land. Open the mapping application and navigate to your property. In the bottom left corner, there's a tab for data layers. We can see multiple different options to choose from. On the top, we have our base layer. Underneath, we have nape imagery. And on the bottom, we have LiDAR elevation data. When delineating stands, the most useful layer is going to be the CIR, or color infrared. Vegetation reflects infrared light more than visible, so the CIR layer allows us to see differences in vegetation more easily. Secondarily, the LiDAR slope model can help us to see differences in terrain that might warrant a stand boundary, such as wet, low-lying areas and hillsides. Keep in mind that elevation layers are transparent, so it's good to pair them with the street base layer to view them. When making your stand boundaries, I recommend focusing on 3 key attributes: species, tree size, and tree density. If any of these attributes differ substantially, it's a good indicator of a different stand and stand condition. However, you'll also want to keep in mind a minimum stand size. Unless you have a very small property, it's difficult to micromanage every group of trees, so I'd recommend a minimum of 3 acres per stand. As you delineate them, be mindful of both the snapping tool and the visibility of other groups and layers. It will help to toggle the data visibility as you go depending on your task. The snapping tool may take some patience to use, but it's going to produce a neater final product if you use it, and I'd also recommend starting a new group just for your stand polygons. Let's take a look at our final product. When you're done, you can name these stands according to their type. You don't have to follow any specific naming conventions here, so use whatever works for you. The next step will be a timber cruise, a systematic sampling of the forest to estimate standing volumes. Cruising helps us determine species composition, density levels, and of course, the amount of wood products we hold in the forest. SilviCultural comes equipped with an inventory estimation tool embedded in every stand polygon. So by collecting some basic data in the field, we can generate inventory estimates for the stands we created. Now, just a warning, the procedure here is a bit more particular to ensure the quality of the data you take, but that doesn't mean it's difficult. This can be done proficiently by anyone with just a little practice. We're going to be taking two measurements, merchantable height and basal area. Merchantable height is simple enough. It's the total usable height of the tree. Basal area is a bit more technical. It's the cross-sectional area of tree trunks measured at breast height and expressed in square feet per acre. These two measurements alone provide enough information about the forest to make reasonable estimates of volumes. Each time we take these measurements in the cruising process, we take what is called a plot. And to get good information, we have to both take an appropriate number of plots and to try to eliminate bias in the location of the plots. That requires good cruise design. So let's start with determining the number of plots to take. A good rule of thumb is to get 1 plot per 2 acres in stand size with a minimum of 5 plots. Once you have determined the number of plots you need, you can manually place them across your stand using the mapping application. Navigate to your stand and use point features to drop plot locations throughout the area. Aim for decent coverage across the entire stand. You want your plots distributed fairly evenly rather than clustered in one area. However, be careful not to introduce bias by unconsciously selecting locations based on what you can see in the aerial imagery. It's tempting to avoid areas that look dense or to target areas that appear to have larger trees, but this will massively skew your results. Try to place your points in a systematic pattern or as randomly as possible across the stand area. Remember, the goal is to get a representative sample of the entire stand, not just the parts that look the most interesting or accessible from above. You can also turn the imagery off on your map to avoid bias. Once you've placed all your plot points, you can export them to your mobile device and navigate to each location in the field to take your measurements. Now it's time to collect the data. The angle gauge we mentioned earlier takes data based on what's called a basal area factor, or BAF. The most common BAF is 10, which means each tree you count represents 10 square feet of basal area per acre. Although if you have larger trees, consider using 20. This is the magic of the angle gauge. It automatically accounts for both tree size and spacing, giving you an instant basal area reading. Here's how it works. When you look through the angle gauge at a tree, you're determining whether that tree is in or out of your plot. An in tree is one that appears wider than the opening in your angle gauge when viewed through the device. For borderline trees where the edges of the tree trunk align exactly with the edges of the opening, you'll count every other one to maintain statistical accuracy. To take a plot, stand at your designated plot center and hold the angle gauge at arm's length at eye level. Systematically sweep the angle gauge in a complete 360-degree circle around you, counting every in tree you encounter. Take your time with this process. Rushing leads to missed trees or double counting. For each in tree, you'll need to identify the species and tally it. I recommend using a simple tally system organized by species. Create a basic field sheet with columns for each common species you expect to encounter, oak, maple, pine, etc., and use tally marks to count trees as you identify them. Leave an area for tree height at the end of the row. Keep your data organized and legible as you'll be entering this information into the SilviCultural system later to generate your volume estimates. Next, we're going to measure the tree heights. While there are sophisticated tools for measuring height, you can get surprisingly accurate estimates using nothing more than a straight stick and some basic geometry. This technique relies on the principle of similar triangles and has been used by foresters for generations. Start by finding a straight stick about 2 to 3 feet long. Hold the stick vertically at arm's length and walk backward from the tree until the stick appears to exactly match the height of the tree from your eye level to the top. When the tree and stick appear the same height through your line of sight, the distance between you and the tree equals the tree's height. Simply pace off that distance or measure it with a tape measure, and you have your tree height. Because we're using eye level as the base of the tree, add your eye height at the end for the most accurate results, though you may make some adjustments for elevation. Remember, we're measuring merchantable height, not total height, so focus on estimating the usable portion of the trunk, up to where the tree becomes too small or branchy for commercial use. typically where the trunk reaches about 8 to 10 inches in diameter. You only have to do this once per plot, so choose a tree that is representative of the height of the average of the tallied trees. When you're finished collecting data for all points, you can bring your data back to your computer and enter your data for each stand by hitting the Inventory button on each stand or Harvest polygon. When you're done, check your data carefully to ensure it was entered correctly and hit Confirm. You can edit this later if needed. Once completed, you'll see the volume estimates populate, broken down by species and volume metric. Now that you've inventoried your stands, it's time to develop a sustainable harvest plan. SilviCultural's harvest planning tool uses an area control framework, which is fundamentally different from the volume control methods many landowners might be familiar with. Understanding this distinction is crucial to creating a truly sustainable management plan. Area control regulates harvest based on the number of acres cut each year, rather than the volume of wood removed. The principle is elegantly simple. If you want to maintain a forest on a 50-year rotation, you can sustainably harvest 1/50th of your total forest area each year. This ensures that by the time you've cycled through your entire property, the first areas you harvested will be ready for another cut. Volume control, by contrast, tries to match annual harvest volume to annual growth, but this approach can be problematic because both harvest volume and growth can be difficult to accurately measure, making error much more likely. To use the harvest planning tool, start by creating a name for your plan, then enter data for each stand type. You can make these classifications as broad or specific as your management objectives require. For each stand type, input your harvest interval, how often you plan to harvest, the total acres in that stand type, and your target harvest age. The target age represents when you want to conduct your final harvest, which you can determine based on your management objectives, whether that's maximum volume production, wildlife habitat, or other goals. Next, enter the expected volume per acre at your target age. Use the forest growth tool or your own inventory data to help you choose realistic numbers. You can work in cords, tons, or 1,000 board feet depending on your market preferences. Keep in mind, these numbers are just estimates and don't impact the effectiveness of the system. Finally, choose between even-aged or uneven-aged management. If you select uneven-aged management, you can add data for intermediate thinnings by entering the volume per acre in percent removal for each entry. For selection systems, simply enter the percentage of standing volume you'll remove during each partial harvest. Once you've entered data for all your stand types, the tool will calculate exactly how many acres you can sustainably harvest each year while maintaining your desired rotation and age structure. This approach creates a reliable framework for consistent long-term forest management that ensures your land remains productive indefinitely. Keep in mind that this system is more limited on smaller parcels, so you may have to adjust the expected harvest intervals to match logistical constraints. With your sustainable annual acreage determined from the harvest planning tool, you can now map out specific harvest blocks on your property. Start by identifying which stands should be prioritized for harvest. Focus first on overmature stands that have reached or exceeded your target age, as these areas are no longer gaining significant volume and may be declining in health or value. Next, target stands showing signs of decline, disease, or storm damage, as these present both immediate risk and opportunity for salvage value. Consider accessibility when planning your blocks. Stands near existing roads or trails will be more economical to harvest and cause less soil disturbance than remote areas requiring new access routes. Think strategically about block size and shape as well. While your tool tells you exactly how many acres to harvest annually, you don't necessarily need to harvest that exact acreage every single year. You might choose to harvest larger blocks every few years rather than small blocks annually, which can be more efficient for logging operations and better for certain wildlife species. Aim for blocks that make sense operationally, avoiding long, narrow strips that are difficult to log efficiently, and considering how your harvest areas will regenerate and connect with existing habitat. Finally, balance your immediate timber market opportunities with long-term management goals. But remember that the area control framework ensures sustainability regardless of these shorter-term decisions. Congratulations! You've successfully set up your property on the SilviCultural Platform and laid the foundation for sustainable forest management. You now have your boundaries mapped, your stands delineated, your timber inventory quantified, and a harvest plan that will keep your forest productive for generations to come. This puts you in that exclusive 90th percentile of forest landowners we mentioned at the beginning. But more importantly, it means you truly understand your land and have the tools to care for it properly. This introductory tutorial has given you the essential framework, but forest management is a lifelong learning journey with endless opportunities to deepen your knowledge and refine your approach. I encourage you to keep learning, and SilviCultural has some courses that can help with just that, so check them out. And remember, if you have any questions, our Forester AI has a custom database of forestry knowledge, and it's available 24/7 for your forest management questions. But overall, your forest is now in capable hands. Yours. Congratulations, and stay tuned for more features coming soon to SilviCultural.